If you were advising Rishi Sunak today, Caroline, would you say you've just got to bite the bullet and fire him?
Yes, yes, I would. But I think perhaps the reason he hasn't is because, he comes from the same sort of stable in some ways, in terms of his own affairs, and feels perhaps a sensitivity about it. But yes, I think he should be decisive.
So the question for everyone today is, has Rishi Sunak lost that trust already? He wanted to distance himself from the sleaze that marred his predecessors and had led to the downfall of his former boss, Boris Johnson. But those ghosts are definitely back as pressure mounts over accusations of financial impropriety by the former Chancellor and now party chair Nadhim Zahawi. Caroline Slocock is former private secretary to Margaret Thatcher and director of the Civil Exchange. Morning, Caroline.
Good morning.
What do you make? I mean, how damaging is this, do you feel? He made these claims that he wanted to renew the mandate, I suppose, the trust relationship with the electorate. He's got an election in just under 2 years' time. How damaging is the current position in your view?
I think it's very damaging. I mean, it's not just the detail of it, but a picture is emerging of him not living up to the standards that he set himself. And last week was a bit of a disaster for them, wasn't it? There was Rishi Sunak not wearing a seatbelt, and then this whole story coming to a real head with Nadhim Zahawi, and then this other story about the BBC, which there may be an historical element about it, but the fact is that the current chair of the BBC didn't declare an interest at the point of his appointment in relation to Boris Johnson's finances. So, yeah, I think it is damaging. And, I think Rishi Sunak genuinely wanted to demonstrate that he was different. But of course, he was part of Boris Johnson's government. And I think the other sort of dimension of this, which sort of hasn't really come through, but will come through, I think, in people's minds if this continues, is that Rishi Sunak was himself Chancellor and had questions over his own affairs, his wife being a non-domicile, his own US green card. And there's a sort of sense here that there is one rule for them and another for us. It's, we pay our taxes by PAYE. The Conservative government has offshore trust arrangements or all sorts of arrangements, which means that they don't. And he hasn't stepped in. He hasn't been decisive on this question.
So on that point, on the Zahawi point, do you think that the decisive thing to do is to say we can't afford any, even if you think you've acted correctly? You were Chancellor, you're having negotiations with HMRC, you paid a penalty for not paying sufficient tax. That appears to be the position. No one's accusing him of a crime or anything like that, but it's allegations of poor behaviour when you were Chancellor of the Exchequer. You're now leading the party. We've got local elections coming up. If you were advising Rishi Sunak today, Caroline, would you say you've just got to bite the bullet and fire him?
Yes, I would. But I think perhaps the reason he hasn't is because he comes from the same sort of stable in some ways, in terms of his own affairs, and feels perhaps a sensitivity about it. But yes, I think he should be decisive. There's a question of truth here as well. Nadhim Zahawi, when he was Chancellor, we now know he knew about this tax issue, said that it was, reports were inaccurate, unfair, and clearly a smear, and he was threatening libel to various journalists. Can we trust what people say? He says, if a government says one thing and then it emerges a few months later that was wrong, it's very corrosive. So yes, get on with it, Rishi Sunak, would be my advice. But I think it might be too late.
Do you think this is an issue for Conservatives generally? You've been around the party for a long time, that Conservatives traditionally are the party of big business. People who end up rising in the Conservative Party have very often had successful business careers. With great wealth often comes complicated tax arrangements. Is this a particular issue for the Tories that particularly at times of austerity, people want to see very straightforward people doing their bit, people making sure they're paying all they could possibly pay? It's quite a hard area for Tories, perhaps, historically even.
I think it is, but I think there's been a sort of long-term trend. I think, you've got people who've made money as entrepreneurs. And now increasingly, I think people are coming in from the city, people like Rishi Sunak. It doesn't look good, does it? To lose, 4.8 million, to be careless with 4.8 million when most people are really struggling. It does look like the party of, that isn't investing their own personal wealth through taxes in Britain. It's not a good look. at this moment. And I think, electorally, it's not a good look. But there's nothing wrong with successful businessmen. Nadhim Zahawi obviously, set up a very successful business. But it's what he's done with the money he's made of it that really matters here.
And is this fixable? Just finally, Caroline, is this can they get through this? Because as you say, there's lots of Rishi Sunak, for example, knows Richard Sharp very well. They both work to there's the Goldman Sachs connection between them. So there's that whole issue. Even leaving Nadhim Zahawi aside, are there steps that can be taken now to clean house, to start again, or can you start again having been the third prime minister in the year, already having a restart once?
Well, I'm sure that Rishi Sunak will struggle through. I can't see myself a scenario where he's replaced, just because the clock is ticking too far and too many prime ministers have already gone. So I think he will probably struggle through. But remember, there are other things, in the closet. There's Dominic Raab and the bullying allegations, for example, and there's the Home Secretary and the fact she broke the ministerial code. So there's a kind of wider pattern and probably other scandals to come out. So, the sooner Rishi Sunak moves on this one, the better. But I think really what they need to do is to get on with delivery. That's what people want. There are some very major issues to be addressed at this stage. And scandals like this are a massive distraction. You can't, you're in number 10, these things become very all-consuming. And meanwhile, there's all the other stuff that we really care about that's not being attended to. So he's got to get a grip. But you cannot say one thing so boldly, integrity, professionalism, and accountability, which is very lacking at this moment. You can't say that and then not act on it. That's the first point of delivery here.
But then if he acts too quickly, people will say, well, he's not in control. I mean, maybe a reshuffle. I mean, could he have a reshuffle this soon? Would that be politically suicide, though?
Well, he'll have to do a bit of reshuffling, won't he? Because, Nadhim Zahawi is a minister. And as well as being chairman, and so some reshuffling will happen. I don't know, but I think my view is, as somebody who's been around the political world for a while, is that Nadhim Zahawi is not going to last.
No, well, we'll have to see what happens. I think that's an interesting prediction, because I can see a scenario where that does happen and also where it doesn't, Caroline. We'll see whether your prediction is correct. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's Caroline Slocock, their former private secretary to Margaret Thatcher and director of the Civil Exchange.